Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Just want to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Avram and Shendi Kelman, with the hope and prayer that Tisha B'av will be a chag filled with joy in the eternal Beis Hamikdash. Our Daf Yomi Parak sponsors, Jeffrey and Sherry Venick and Stephen and Holly Venick, in memory of their father, Herman Venick, Chani Yisrael ben Ruvain Zal. Herman was a beloved husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and longtime pillar of our Kehillah. May our collective learning serve as an aliyah for his neshama. And the week of learning is sponsored by Akiva Andrews in honor of his wife, Dr. Karen Andrews' academic appointment as a lecturer at Hebrew University, and by Ira Miriam Grossman in the merit of a refuah shleima for all those in need. And today we also have a sponsor for today's daf, Eve Messing, in memory of her father, and who is also the grandfather of Shimei and Batsheva Messing, Alexander Drucker Zal. And our learning should be an aliyah for his neshama. Okay, so we are, today's daf is daf Yud, and we're going to pick up on daf Yud Amud Aleph on the second line. But just to review where we were. So we were talking about this, the question was, we were dealing with, according to those who say, that if you have the outside of a mavui has something that's clear, that functions as a lechi, that makes it clear that it's a separate area and it's a heker. So then even if it can't be seen from inside, so then we're going to say that that's still sufficient, and you should be able to carry inside of that mavoi or chatzar. So the question that the Gemara asked was, wait a second, we have this Mishnah, we grappled with it a little bit before, it's going to come up later in Daf Tzadi Beis, which is the idea that if you have a larger chatzar and a smaller chatzar, we say the larger chatzar can carry because for them it's just a Pesach, but the smaller chatzar is fully open and it doesn't have a lechi or anything like that, so therefore you cannot carry in the smaller chatzar. And so ask the Gemara that wait a second, if it's okay that you could have a lechi, a distinction from the outside, even though you don't see it from the inside, so then this smaller chatzar, when you're looking at it from the outside, actually you see walls on the side, which shows you that it's distinct from your larger chatzar, and therefore why not say that the fact that you see those side parts, which function as a lechi, as two lechis, according to the way we learn, so why not say that therefore you should be able to carry in the smaller chatzar because of those lechis, which are the walls that are visible from the outside. So the Gemara basically had to contort itself in a certain way to say that we're talking about a very specific case. We're talking about because we're saying, why don't those walls function? So the Gemara started by saying, because the walls, and by the way, Maishi, thank you very much for sending out pictures that went out to the chats. I'll try and refer to them, make life a little bit easier. So we said that we're talking about, if you take a look at picture 70, where the walls of the smaller chatzar actually come out into the bigger chatzar. So you don't have the side walls that can appear as a lechi because the smaller chatzar actually comes into the larger chatzar, and those walls are now further set back. So therefore it doesn't work. So then the Gemara was grappling with the question, well, wait a second. Why not say that even if those walls come in, those walls are within 3 tfachim of the edge? And in fact, that makes sense because we learn in a brisa that the Mishnah has to be talking about a case where the larger chatzar is larger than the smaller chatzar by only 1 amma. So if so, presuming that it's centered, you have only 3 tvachim on each side, and the walls coming in take up some of that area. So why not say, look at those walls that jut out from the smaller chatzar as if they're connected to the larger chatzar's walls to its right and left via the mechanism of lavud, and then we'll still have lechis on the outside that are near me'achutz, that you can see from the outside. So the Gemara said, okay, so not only do we have to be talking about walls that come in, but those walls that are coming in have to be off center. And you have one that's 4 tvachim and one that's 2 tvachim. Once you have one that's 4 tvachim, so you can no longer say lavud. So it says the Gemara, but who cares? You have one that's 2 tvachim, and we only need a lechi from one side. So the Gemara says, no, so we're talking about where it has lechis from 2 sides, and it goes according to Rebbe, who's of the opinion that you need 2 pasim in a chatzar. So we had to take ourselves in order to establish that, in other words, according to the one who says that it's okay if a lechi is seen from the outside and not the inside, to understand this Mishnah on Tzadi Beis, you have to contort yourself a little bit. It has to be talking about the walls come in, it's off center, and it has to be according to Rebbe that you need 2 pasim matir a chatzar. So now the Gemara says they're still not happy with this suggestion, even though we've come up with a way. Ask the Gemara, hi mai, what's going on here? If you're going to tell me that it doesn't work this way, that you cannot look at the outside, if you can only see it from the outside, that doesn't constitute a valid lechi, it has to be seen from the inside. So then what the Gemara is going to basically walk through here is, why did the Brisa have to tell you that it's a case of the smaller chutzner being 10 amas and the larger chutzner being 11 amas? So what we're going to try and say is that if you're of the opinion that nirmi b'achus or shavim b'afnim, where you only see the lechi from the outside, if that is not valid, I have a good explanation of why the Mishnah was telling us, the Brisa tells us that the Mishnah is discussing a case of only 1 amma extra from the larger chutzner to the smaller chutzner. But if you hold that nirmi b'achutz v'shavim b'afnim, where it's only seen from the outside, is a valid lechi, so then I have no good explanation about why the Brisa specifically established the case as being the smaller chutzner 10 amas and the larger chutzner 11. That's what we're going to do right now. So it says the Gemara, so if I say that nirmi b'achutz v'shavim b'afnim is not a valid lechi, so the Rebbe savarla Rebbe Yossi, and Rebbe, what we're going to say is that Rebbe holds like Rebbe Yossi. Rebbe Yossi is of the opinion that Rebbe Yossi actually says this by a mavui, but he says that we're going to see this opinion shortly, that the lechi needs to be at least 3 tfachim. So now, if you have Rebbe who holds you need a lechi from each side, right? And the lechi, and so I'm sorry. So he says that halacha by mavui. Rashi explains that we know a chatzar is more chamor than a mavui. So if he requires it by a mavi, he'll for sure require it by a chatzar. I'm not going to get into the details of that. But so you have Rebbe Yossi, who's of the opinion that each lechi needs to be 3 tvachim. You have Rebbe who requires 2 lechis on either side, right? So we're going to say Rebbe holds like Rebbe Yossi that you need 3 tvachim. Rebbe himself holds you need 2. The Rebbe Zera, the Ravina Lessa. We don't need to come onto this whole contorted thing that the walls of the small chutzner come in, which was Rebbe Zera's halacha, and we don't need Ravina that they were off kilter, but rather Mishum Hachi Ketana Be'eser Gedola Ba'achas Esrei Mishum the Rebbe Savala Rebbe Yossi. So he says this is going to make perfect sense according to this view. We don't need to get into the walls coming in. We don't need to get into the off kilter, because what we're going to say is as follows. The reason it has to be where it's at least 1 amma greater than the small chutzner is because we even for the large chutzner to be able to carry, it has to be where the large chutzner, where it's seen as a pesach to the smaller chutzner. The way it's being seen as a pesach to the smaller chutzner, according to Rebbe, is it needs a lechi on both sides. And since Rebbe holds like Rebbe Yossi that a lechi needs to be 3 tvachim, so in order for the larger chutzner to carry, which is the basic halacha that it's teaching us in the Mishnah in Sadi Beis, in order for the people in the larger chutzner to carry, there need to be lechis on the side of the smaller chutzner that enables it to be seen as just a pesach. So therefore, if each lechi needs to be 3 tvachim, and you need 2 lechis according to Rebbe, so then you need 3 tvachim on either side is 6 tvachim, that adds up to an amma. So that's the chiddush of the Brisa, is that when we're dealing with the large chutzner being larger than the smaller chutzner, it needs to be larger by at least an amma, so that you have enough room to have 2 lechis, each of them being 3 tvachim. And that explains what the Brisa is telling us, is it cannot be less than 1 amma wider. The larger one cannot be less than 1 amma wider than the smaller one, because you need these 2 lechis, and they each need to be 3 tvachim, which adds up to an amma. So it says the Gemara, according to that view, everything makes sense. Ela I amrit, but if you're going to say, like they were trying to say yesterday, that you can explain this Mishnah even according to the view, that in fact it counts if you can only see it from the outside and you don't see it from the inside. So now it's going to say the Gemara, if that's true, I have no explanation of why the Brisa says specifically this is a case where the bigger chutzner is 11 and the smaller one is 10. So we're going to say, so now we're going to say, if we say it's near lechi, we have to go back to our contorted case, Reb Zera, which is Reb Zera's case where the walls of the small chutzner come into the larger chutzner. And we're going to have to say the halacha Ravina, Ravina, which is the one that the small chutzner is off kilter where you have 4 on one side and 2 on the other, 4 tfachim, 2 tfachim, because if you don't say that, you're going to end up with lavud, and then it should still work. So it has to be where it's off kilter. So we're going to say, the Reb Zera, the Ravina Isa, the Rebbe lo savar la Reb Yossi. And clearly, if we're establishing the case where it's off kilter and the two sides are 4 and 2, right? So it can't, and we have to hold like Rebbe that you need 2. Clearly, he cannot hold like Reb Yossi, because if it's 4 and 2, the one that has 2 tfachim doesn't qualify as a lechi according to Reb Yossi. And you need 2 because we're going in Rebbe. So this is just taking us back to our contorted, I'm calling it the contorted case, but the case of yesterday where you need all of those elements. It has to be like Rebbe, it has to be like Ravina, it has to be like Reb Zera, it's off kilter, the walls come in, and it happens to be not like Reb Yossi. So then ask the Gemara, so if you're going back to the case, the contorted answer from yesterday, Gedola b'achas eser lamali. So explain to me, why does the Bryce have to tell us that the larger chutzner is 11 and the smaller chutzner is 10? Memanav shach, regardless. So there's 2 halachas that were taught in the Mishnah. And the 2 halachas are that the larger chutzner can carry and the smaller chutzner cannot carry. So the Gemara says, okay, let's analyze both those halachas and see if there's a reason why it needs to be 11 and 10. So if you're coming to demonstrate to me why there are lechis that enable, as I just explained before, for the larger chutzner to carry, it needs to be a pesach to the smaller chutzner, and that requires lechis. So if you're coming to just demonstrate to me that there need to be excess walls in the larger chutzner, and therefore, so that's what it's coming to tell me. So in order that the people in the larger chutzner should be able to carry all together, because this way they could look at the smaller chutzner as just being separated by a pesach. So if that's what it's doing, because we already established we're not going like Reb Yossi, who you can't say it's Reb Yossi who requires a lechi of 3 tvachim, because already we established the case as being 4 and 2, and we know it's going like Rebbe. It has to be going like Rebbe. We established that yesterday. So it's not going like Reb Yossi. So you cannot say that you require each side to be 3. So if so, all the Mishnah would need to be telling us is you have 10 amas that open to the small chutzner, and you have 1 tefach on either side, right? And that's enough, because now you have 2 lechis according to Rebbe. We don't hold like Reb Yossi that it needs 3 tvachim, and that would be enough to permit the large chutzner to carry in the small chutzner. So therefore, clearly, it's not coming to tell you that you need an extra amma in order to explain why the people in the large chutzner could carry, because they don't need an extra amma. You just need a little bit on either side, an extra tefach on either side. So says the Gemara, okay, maybe it's coming because I needed to learn my halacha that the smaller chutzner cannot carry. So maybe, says the Gemara, it's coming to tell me the 11 and 10 was coming so that I would say, in this case, it's usher to carry in the chutzner, but if it would be less than this, then we would end up with lavud, and it would be mutter to carry in the chutzner. So maybe that's why it needs to tell us the extra 1 in order that we know that if not for this, then it would be mutter, because we would have lavud. So says the Gemara, lashmi'inan the miflagi tuva. But if that's true, if that's all the Brisa was coming to do, was to say we want to make sure that you recognize that the larger chutzner has to be reasonably larger than the smaller one, in order that you don't end up with a case of lavud that would then say that there are actually lechis on either side, and then it should be mutter to carry. In order to make sure you don't have that, that's why it's telling you it needs to be 11, because it needs to be larger than 10, so that you don't run into a problem of lavud, which would then be mater the smaller chutzner, according to this view, because this is the view that if you see it from outside, not inside, it's okay. But says the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense either, because why, if that's the point you're trying to prove, so say that the smaller chutzner is 10 and the larger chutzner is 20 amas. And we would know that the reason you're saying it's so much larger, even if you said it's 12 amas, whatever it is, because that way you would be saying you need distance so that you don't end up with a scenario of lavud, right? So again, why does a Brisa need to say it's 11 and 10? Why not say it's 12 and 10? And then you'd prove your point even better. Rashi raises the question, wait a second, maybe the reason it says 11 is saying as soon as you dip below 11, you have lavud, and that's what it's coming to tell you. But says Rashi, that's not true, because I don't need an entire extra amma in order. But I don't need an entire extra amma in order to set up a case where it would still be usher to carry in the smaller chutzner. Why? Because if, let's say, I had only 4 tfachim extra, so the smaller chutzner was 10 amas and the larger chutzner was 10 amas and 4 tfachim, I could set up a case that doesn't work. What would that be? I would have a half a tefach on one side, I'd have 3.5 tfachim on the other side. So then the 3.5 tfachim would not work because lava doesn't work at 3.5, only at 3. And I would be back to having only 1 lechi, and that wouldn't work. So I could make a case where it's usher to carry in the small chutzner, even if it was less than 11 amas. So says the Gemara, if you hold that nirim v'chutz v'shavim v'afnim, where you see it from outside but not inside, is an acceptable form of lechi, I have no explanation for, even once you contort yourself to say the walls come in, it's off center, it's Rebbe, I still have no explanation for why it needed to be dafka 11 amas. Versus if you're saying that it's not a valid lechi, and all we're worried about is being mater the large chatzar, so then I have a good explanation for 11, because it's going like Rebbe, who needs 2, and it's going like Rabbi Yossi, who requires 3 tfachim in each, so you need an extra amma, so that makes sense. So rather, because I cannot find any good explanation according to those who hold nirim v'chutz mishavim mafnim is a valid lechi. And I cannot find a valid reason for why it would need to say then that it's 11 amas and 10 amas for the larger and the smaller. Shema mina, I learned from that nirim v'chutz mishavim mafnim eino nida mishum lechi. I have a good raya that in fact, if it's not visible from inside, it does not count as a lechi. Shema mina, in fact, this is a good proof. Well, we're going to get back to seeing whether it's in fact a good proof. Well, it is a good proof, but whether we pass on like that, we'll see in a minute. Okay, continues the Gemara. Reb Yosef lo shmieli hashmaitza. Reb Yosef said, I never heard this from my Rebbe, which was what? What are we talking about? Yesterday, Rabba bar Rav Huna, who's the son of Rav Huna, and Rav Huna was the Rebbe of Reb Yosef, that he said, Rabba bar Rav Huna said that nirim v'chutz v'shavim mafnim is nidon mishum lechi. That's a valid lechi. So Reb Yosef says, Rabba bar Rav Huna must be saying this in his own name, not in the name of his father, because I never heard it from my Rebbe, Rav Huna, and so therefore I don't know the halacha that he said. Amalei Abaya. So Abaya said to Rav Yosef, so this is something we've encountered a number of times as we've gone through Shas, is that the Gemara, I think in Nedarim maybe, says the story where Rav Yosef forgot a lot of his learning. And so his Talmidim, Abaya in particular, used to often remind him, you said this to us, Rabbi, here's the context in which you said it, and then often the Gemara says, Rav Yosef actually remembered, but in any event, says Abaya, At Amrit Nielon, you told this to us, V'aha Amrit Nielon, the time you told us that Nira Mibachutz, or Shavim Mibafnim, where you only see it from outside, is a valid lechi, was as follows. The Amr Rami Bar Abba Amr Rav Huna. Rami Bar Abba says the name of Rav Huna. Lechi HaMoshech Im Dofno Shom Mavoi Pachas Midalad Amos, Nidu Mishum Lechi. So it says as follows, that if you have a lechi that sticks out, let's just find this case. This would be number 73 in the pictures that were sent out. You have a lechi that sticks out in a way that it's evident from outside that you have a lechi, but from inside it just looks like a continuation of the wall. Now I'm not sure I fully agree with this picture, because I think many of the Rishonim understand that the opposing wall has to be long, because we're going to talk about carrying. The way this picture shows it, it would be carrying a little bit in the Rosh Hashanah. But whatever the point is, the idea is that the wall extends from the inside. You cannot tell that there's a lechi, but from the outside you see that it's a lechi. So that's the case. That lechi hamoshechem dofno shamavi, the lechi continues the wall. So from the inside you cannot see that it's a lechi. Pachas midalad amos, less than dalad amos. So nida mishum lechi. It's considered a lechi. We already established previously that if you have a lechi that's more than dalad amos, it doesn't constitute a lechi, because that's its own mavoi. So that's not a valid lechi. So we say if it's less than 4 amas, then it is a valid lechi. Umishtamish imchuda pnimi, and you can carry up to the inner edge of the lechi. So in this picture, you would carry up to the end of the mavui, but dalad amos. But if the lechi would be a full dalad amos, nida mishum mavi, it would be considered its own mavui. Va'asar leishtamish bekulo, you couldn't carry anywhere in the mavui, because it would no longer be a valid lechi. So it's saying, if you have this lechi that's basically near mi bachutz or shavim mi bafnim, from inside you cannot tell, but from outside you can tell. If the lechi is daled amos, it's not a valid lechi, and therefore the mavoi has no lechi, you can't carry in the mavoi. If it is less than daled amos, so then it's a valid lechi, and as long as you don't carry opposite the lechi, meaning you carry only in the mavoi, but not beyond the inner lip of, or the inner edge of this lechi. So that was the memra, and Abaye reminded of Yosef, you said to us on this, Shema mina tlas. I learned from this memra, I learned from this statement three things. Shema mina ben lechayayin aser. I learned that you cannot carry across from the lechi itself. Why? Because it said that if it's less than daled amos, it's a valid lechi, and therefore you could carry up to the lechi, but not beyond, not opposite the lechi. So you see that this was a topic we discussed previously. According to him, he's saying you cannot carry across from a lechi. Ushma mina, I also learned out meshech mavoi ba'arba, that a mavoi, the minimum size of a mavoi is daled amos, because that's why it's saying if the lechi is daled amos, then it's its own mavoi and it's not a valid lechi. If it's less than daled amos, it's okay. So what do you see? You see that daled amos is the shear that makes something into its own mavoi. So that's the shear for a mavoi. That's the second thing we learn. Ushma mina, the third thing we're going to learn is nir mibachas or shavim mibafnin nida misham lechi. So and as we mentioned, this lechi is flush with the wall when you're looking at it from the inside. You only realize it's a lechi from the outside, and yet we're saying it's a valid lechi as long as it's less than daled amos. So you see that nir mibachas or shavim mibafnim is a lechi. The hilchasa and the halacha therefore is nir mibachas or shavim mibafnim nida misham lechi. So in fact, if you can only see it from the outside and from the inside you can't tell, nonetheless it's a valid lechi. So ask the Gemara, wait a second. Tiyufta v'hilchasa, right now we just brought something that says that it is a valid lechi, but just a couple minutes ago we established that we had no valid explanation for why the Brisa limited the Mishnah on Tzadi Beis to being 11 amos and 10 amos, unless we understood that nir mibachas or shavim mibafnim is not a valid lechi. So why we brought a tiyufta that proved that it's not valid, and now you're saying the halacha is it is valid. So the Gemara says yes, even though we had a tiyufta, nonetheless the halacha is that it's a valid lechi. Why? Mishum the Tani Reb Chia Kavase, because we had this yesterday that Reb Chia paskind in his in the brayso he brought. We had this in the context. We were talking about Reb Yochanan didn't learn it, but Reb Chia did learn it, and we proved because we had Reb Shimon Berebi and Reb Chia were saying which one holds like which. We brought that brayso of Reb Chia, and as we know by braysos that the braysos of Reb Chia and Reb Yoshia were considered the authoritative braysos, and so therefore we are going to paskin like Reb Chia. So even though from the Mishnah on Tzadi Beis with the brayso that explains it, you have a Tanaitic opinion that nir mibachas v'shavim mibafnim is not a valid lechi. Nonetheless, because of Reb Chia's brayso, we're going to paskin that it is a valid lechi. Okay, so now back to our Mishnah. So our Mishnah on Beis Amud Aleph said as follows: that if you have a mavoi that's higher than 20 amos, you should lower it, and Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need to lower it. Then the Mishnah says, "V'arachav me'asar amos yimayit." If it's wider than 10 amos, you should narrow it to have less than 10 amos. And it doesn't say anything about Rabbi Yehuda, right? It doesn't say whether Rabbi Yehuda holds that you do not need to be mamayit. Now, in fact, on Beis Amud Beis, we brought a brayso, which we're about to bring again, that he does argue. But okay, says the Gemara, Amar Abaya, Tana, we learned in a brayso, V'harachav me'asar yimayit. The brayso is more clear. It says if it's more than 10, you should narrow it. So it's less than 10. Rabbi Yehuda says, Eina tzarich l'mayit, that you do not need to narrow it. Okay, so it's clear that in the brayso, even if it's not clear in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda argues not only do you not need a lower 20 amma korah, but you also don't need to narrow the opening of the mavoi to less than 10. So the Gemara is going to try and figure out, okay, so Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds you can have wider than 10. V'ad kama, what's the limit? What's the outer limit that Rabbi Yehuda would say? Beyond this, you can't have the width of a mavoi even according to Rabbi Yehuda. So it says the Gemara, Savar Reb Achi kamed Reb Yosef lemeimar ad 13 amos shlish. That Reb Achi wanted to say in front of Reb Yosef that the limit that Rabbi Yehuda probably employs is 13 1/3 amos. Where does he get that from? The kavachomer pasi biros, because he'll learn a Kal V'chomer from Pasi Biros. So Pasi Biros, what is that? We've encountered this also many times, which was the idea that when the Olei Regalim were coming up to Yerushalayim, it was a long trip, and sometimes they would have to rest over Shabbos. So what would they do? They would pitch a tent in the Rishus HaRabim where they were, and they used to have these pits, these wells that had water, or cisterns, whatever it was, that had water, that so that people could drink and their animals could drink. So what did these cisterns or wells look like? They were 10 tfachim deep. They were a pit there, and they were more than daled al daled. So what's the issue? The issue is that where the water was held is a rishus hayachid, because it's a pit that's deep. But where you need the water is up on the street level, which is the Rishus HaRabim. So if I reach into the well and take out water and then put it on for my animals or for myself on the side of the pit, which is the Rishus HaRabim, then I'm carrying from Rishus Hayachid to Rishus HaRabim. I can't do that, obviously. So therefore, Chazal set up that we're going to make a special kula by the Olei Regalim, that we're going to put up these little L-shaped brackets, 4 of them around the Pasei, these are called Pasei Biros, the boards around a bar, and basically that's going to be enough. So if you want to take a look, there's a picture of it on number 74, which and the way we learn is that each animal is an aman 2/3 thick, and you need 4 be able to go in and 4 coming out, because they used to put them together in buckets in batches of 4. So that's how they came up with 13 1/3 amos. So what's the big chiddush of this? The big chiddush of this is that normally we require for an area to be considered enclosed, that omed marub al aparetz, that there's more physical structure around this space than there is opening. And so for most things we've been talking about, a mava, you have 3 walls, you have 1 open, no problem, because you have, but here you have a case where there's much less structure than there is open space, but it's a special kula we do for the Olei Regalim so that they would have an option when they're going up. So says the Gemara, I'm going to make a Kal V'chomer from there. Uma pasi biro she'tarta behem parts murubala omed, that if I see by Pasei Biros, which obviously we're trying to be lenient in order to help out the people who are being Ola Regel, that there I allow more open space than physical structure, so that's a big kula. Nonetheless, despite my desire to give as much latitude as possible to the Ola Regalim, I nonetheless did not allow them more than 13 1/3. Then the case of a mavoi where we see it's less lenient, because in fact we require omed murav parts, we require more physical structure than opening. So you see that we are less meko by a mavoi than we are by Pasei Biros. Nonetheless, so therefore, if a mavoi is more chamor than Pasei Biros, and even Pasei Biros we only allow 13 1/3 amos, so presumably by a mavoi we're never going to allow more than 13 1/3 amos, and therefore when Rabbi Yehuda says some shear that's greater than 10 amos, probably his shear is 13 1/3. So the Gemara says, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, that Kal V'chomer. V'hino senes, the very Kal V'chomer you're using, I could use to establish the opposite halacha. I'll say as follows. Pasei Biros she'tarta behem parts murubala omed, lo tater behem yosim mishlosh amos shlish. So he says, the Pasei Biros, I already give them a major kula in the sense that I let them have more open space than physical structure, and therefore I don't give them more than 13 amos1/3. Mavoi shelo tartable parts murubala omed, but a mavoi where we do have more physical structure than we have open space, I have more latitude to have a wider opening. So therefore I'll say tater bar yosem miyod gimel amos shlish. So I would say that I could make an argument that it's only by Pasei Biros where we're already allowing them to have a mechitza that's mostly open air and more open air than structure. So in that case I can only do 13 1/3. But a mavoi where I have plenty of physical structure, more than open space, maybe it's more than 13 1/3. So that's not a good Kal V'chomer. Moreover, says the Gemara, inami, I could make an argument which is just going to show you that Pasei Biros should not be the measure or the way you learn out about mavoi. Why? Because continues the Gemara, Le'idach gisa, I'll tell you the opposite direction, that if I look at Pasei Biros, I can make an argument that you should never allow more than 10 amos, which obviously Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree with, because we said he allows more than 10 amos. What would that argument be? I would say Pasei Biros de kilu b'chad kulo, akol bo kulo achrino. So I could say as follows, that maybe that Pasei Biros, that I already did one kula, so I've shown that I'm really trying to make kulas, that one I'll say another kula, which is I'll allow it 13 1/3. So not only on top of allowing more open space than physical structure, I'll also give it wider opening than I would allow in a mavoi. But mavoi, klal lo. I'll say mavoi, which we see we don't allow more open space than wall, so we're also not going to allow an expanded opening. So therefore, what Pasei Rose would tell me by a mavoi, I should never have more than 10, and yet we know that Rabbi Yehuda allows more than 10. So says the Gemara, Pasei Rose is not a good example. It's different, and therefore, for the reasons we said, we could prove this way or that way. We're not going to learn it from there. So we don't exactly know how wide Rabbi Yehuda is. The Tosfos on Beis Amud Beis talked about this because we kind of established that Rabbi Yehuda was learning from the Ulam, although eventually we said maybe he was just learning from the houses of Malachim. So Tosfos says, so you see that it should be like a Ulam, that it's 20 amas. But Tosfos himself says, but it's a kasha because our Gemara here seemed to not prove anything about 20 amas from the Ulam. So, however, we want to learn that. Okay, says the Gemara. Tani Levi. Levi learned a brayso as follows. Mavashu rachav esrim amma, that if you have a mavah that's 20 amas wide, no, it's kana b'emtiyuso v'dayo. So the brayso says as follows. So I have a mavah. We're not talking about Rabbi Yehuda anymore. We're talking about a regular. I have a mavah. It's 20 amas. Its opening is 20 amas wide. So the issue is you can't have more than 10 amas. So says Levi, I'm going to bring a brayso as follows. All you need to do is stick a pole. It's a picture number 75 in the pictures. Stick a pole in the middle. So then you have the pole on either side. I'm sorry, you have 10 amas on either side. And so you have no opening that's greater than 10 amas. You have two openings to this mavli, each of which is a touch less than 10 amas because you stuck this pole in the middle. So that's the brayso that Levi brought. So it says the Gemara, Hu tani la v'hu omer la dein halacha kosa mishnah. Levi is the one who taught us that brayso, and yet he himself said the halacha is not like it. Ikadami, there are those who said that it wasn't Levi who directly said it wasn't good. Amr Shmuel mishmei de Levi. It was Shmuel who said it in the name of Levi. Ein halacha kosa mishnah. The halacha doesn't follow that mishnah that Levi quoted. Elohechi avid. So okay, fine. So that mishnah is no good. It's not enough to just stick up a pole. What should one do if you have an opening 20 amas wide, and you want to basically do the minimum you need to do in order to close it? Now, obviously, you could stick up a wall that's 10 amas wide, and then you'll only have 10 amas left. That's the easy one, but this is the Gemara, so we're going to try and figure out other ways to do it. Okay, so Elahechi Avid, how should you do it? Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Mishmei de Levi, in the name of Levi, as follows, turn Talmud Beis, that Ose pas gavoa Sarah b'meshech arba amos umamida la'arko shel mavoi. So this is in picture 76. So the idea basically is you have your 20 amos wide, and instead of sticking just one little thing that would be a mechitza that you try and break it into two openings, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pillar that's 10 tvachim tall and 4 amas deep, which, as we've said before, is enough to create its own mavoi, and I'm going to put it lengthwise in the mavoi. And now what's going to happen is now I have. Now, by the way, I should explain. We're going to learn more about this in a minute. But the reason the pole doesn't work, the halach is not like that Mishnah, is we say ase avira the high gisa mavatale. That you have the 10 amas of open air on this side and 10 amas of open air on that side is going to get rid of that little pole. So what we're doing now is by putting something that is 10 tvachim tall and 4 amas deep lengthwise in the mavoi, instead of having a mechitza that can just be knocked out by the air on either side, we're actually creating two mavois here, right? So by putting a full 4 amma thing in the middle, which is enough of a size for a new mavoi, I now have two mavois. They're side by side, but each one is less than 10 amas wide. So that's why this is a good solution according to Shmuel. So inami, so that's one good solution for what I could do. Inami kid Rabbi Yehuda. Or I can extrapolate from something that Rabbi Yehuda said to solve this problem also. Dam Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda said, Mavashu rachav chamesh amas. So Rabbi Yehuda was dealing with a different case of 15 amas wide, but we're going to apply it to even our case of 20. So what did he do? Marchik shtei amas v'osa pas shalosh amas. So he separated, if you take a look, that's picture number 77. He left from the side of the mavoi, which is 15 amas wide, he left a 2 tvachim space, and then he put a 3 tvachim mechitza there. So now what happened? So we look at the 3 tefach mechitza as, the 3 amma mechitza as being omed meruba ala paretz. There's more, 3 amas is more than 2 amas, obviously. So 3 amas is more than 2 amas, and therefore there's more physical structure than open, and we're going to treat that as if it's closed, right? We're dealing with amos here, so there's no lavud, but there is omed meruba ala paretz. There's more physical structure that's there. So that was Rabbi Yehuda's solution. So now, therefore, so if you take a look at these pictures, number 78, if you extrapolate Rabbi Yehuda's concept, Rabbi Yehuda was using it to get rid of 5 amas, to take it from 15 to 10. So we have a 20 amma opening. So all you do is you do Rabbi Yehuda's solution on both sides. On each side of the mava, you have 2 amas of free space, and then you have 3 amas. Or alternatively, you could take a look at picture number 79. You could put 4 amas of open space, and then a pillar that's 6 amas, and you're still going to have omed meruba al paretz, that there's more physical structure than open, and you'll block it off, and now you're left with only a 10 amma opening for your mavoi, which is okay. So it says the Gemara, Ve'amai, let's figure this out. So pretty much the Gemara is going to try and say, why was this specifically the structure that Rabbi Yehuda had to, what can you learn from the fact that this was his solution and not other things? It seems that the Gemara is operating under a presumption. Rashi implies this later on when Rashi says, that evidently they wanted as little, they would like as they would do not like large blockages in the opening to the mavi. They'd rather have multiple small ones. So therefore, the Gemara is going to try and figure out, aren't there scenarios you could have done smaller mechitzos, which is evidently preferable in some fashion, and from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda did not do that, and he said you need space of 2 and then standing of 3, that what we can learn from that. That's the structure of what's going to happen right now. Says the Gemara, V'amai, why does it need to be 2 amas of space and 3 amas of board? Why not do the following? Yaseh pas amo mechza. So why not put next to the wall of the mavoi a 1.5 amma board, v'yarchik shtei amos, and then expand, you'll leave open space of 2 amas, v'yaseh pas amo mechza, and then you'll do another 1.5 amas. So if you look, that's picture number 80. So it's saying, rather than have a 3 amma wide board, I would rather cut it into 1.5 and 1.5. So why not do that? Put 1.5 next to the wall, 2 amas of open space, and 1.5 amma of wall. So from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda did not do that, which would have been preferable for people to have smaller blockages at the opening of the mavoi, from the fact that he did not do that, Shema mina omed meruba ala parts mishtei ruchos lo have omed. So we should learn from that the following. So the question is as follows. I just said to you that we have this concept that if omed is meruba ala paretz, if the physical structure is larger than the opening, so therefore we look at it as if it's closed. So the question is as follows: can it be where in order to figure out the omed meruba ala paretz, we could add up the omed on either side? Or does the omed that's next to the opening have to be at least as wide or wider than the opening, right? So if we say omed meruba ala paretz mishtei ruchos, so that's going to say you can add together the omed on either side to exceed the parotz, right? So if you look at this scenario, picture 80, that's what you would have. You would have 1.5 plus 1.5 would equal 3, which is obviously greater than 2. But in order to get greater than 2, I need to add those 2 together. 1.5 itself is obviously less than 2. So it would seem that if the parutz is larger than the omed, than one of the omeds, it seems that you can't, that doesn't work. And that would explain why Rabbi Yehuda had to say a case of a gap of 2 followed by mechitza of 3, because then the mechitza itself of 3 is larger than the gap of 2. Right? So we're saying from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda did it, 3 standing together knocks out or closes up 2 open, but from the fact that he did not do a 1.5 closed, 2 open, 1.5 closed, must be because he's telling us that you cannot combine the 2 sides to override the parutz. So says the Gemara, no, don't prove that. Lo lo mei melacha have omed. Maybe, in fact, we could count things from two sides, and 1.5 plus 1.5 exceeds 3. But why here did Rabbi Yehuda not give that scenario? Because we would have a different problem. So the problem would be is that if we were closing up a space, and that space was, let's say, 5 amas wide, so I could put 1.5 and 1.5 on either side, and it would add together to 3 to knock out the 2. That actually works. So you could have a scenario where you add the two sides together. But in this particular case, we're trying to craft our 5 alongside an opening of the mavui that's 10 amas. So now what do you have? You have a scenario where if you look at your second beam, the one that's furthest removed from the wall of the mavui, you have 2 amas on one side, which is larger than the 1.5, and you have 10 amas on the other side, which is larger than 1.5. So if both sides of the open exceed the closed, the standing, it's going to be mevatel. So therefore, that's the reason Rabbi Yehuda couldn't say that. But maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree that you could combine, if I was dealing with just a plain opening of 5, I could add 1.5 and 1.5 on either side in order to knock out or to consider closed the 2 that's in between. So says the Gemara, okay, so let me give you a different suggestion where we're going to address this, where you do not have both sides having more open space than the omid. So what would that case be? The yase pas amma. So why not put 1 amma wall next to the mavui wall, the yarchik amma, and then put an amma of space. The yase pas amma, then put another board of 1 amma, the yarchik amma, and then leave another amma of space. The yase pas amma. So you would have a 5 ammas you have wall of an amma, open space, wall of an amma, open space, wall of an amma. So you again have 3 and 2, and you have 3 standing and 2. So you have parts merubal omid. I'm sorry, you have omid merubal parts, and we've taken care, we think, of the fact that it's not going to, the 2 sides of the farthest beam aren't going to override it, because now the space of 1 amma between the second and third beams is not larger than the beam itself, because the beam is 1 amma and the space is 1 amma, so we won't have asavir dahagisa dahagisa mavatale. So says the Gemara. So says the Gemara, no. So therefore, shema mino omid kapar, it's aser. So it must be that if one of the beams, meaning in this case each one is 1 amma, is equal to the space that it's trying to cover over, that doesn't work. That you need that the omid has to be larger. Each omid has to be larger than the space that it's trying to knock out. So the Gemara says, no, I would tell you that really it's okay to do what's outlined here. And again, if I was dealing with an opening of just 5, I could do solid, open, solid, open, solid. That would be fine, even though each of the solids is not larger than the open, because everything is 1 amma wide. That could work if we were dealing with a 5. So, but says the Gemara, I still have the same problem, that I have 10 ammas open on the other side of the third beam, and you thought that as long as the 2 sides of air were not greater than the beam, that it wouldn't be mevatel the beam. Says the Gemara, no, it is mevatel the beam, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda did not say this scenario of 3 amma boards separated by 2 amma spaces because of that. But generally speaking, you could have the omud match the parrots and still do it as long as you have overall omud merubal parrots where you have 3 to 2. So says the Gemara, all right. So then I'll give you a different suggestion. So the yarchik amma, why not do the following? Separate an amma. This is going to be picture 82. The yarchik amma, separate. Till now we were adding where the beams started. The last 2 cases, the beams started against the wall. So why not do the following? Let's separate from the wall. We're going to leave an amma of space next to the wall of the mavui. The yasa pas amo mechza, and then I'm going to have wall of 1.5. The yarchik amma, then I'm going to leave a space of 1 amma. The yasa pas amo mechza, and then I'm going to make a beam of 1.5. So now you have 1 of space, 1.5 of omid, 1 of space, 1.5 of omid. So again, the last 2 things we said, the Gemara knocked out because it said asavir dahagisa mavatole. So as long as you had equal or more openness on both sides of that third pillar, it's going to knock it out. But now, says the Gemara, I've created a scenario where the space on the other side of the 10 amos is only 1 amma versus the omeid is 1.5 ammas. So now now I have a case where you for sure cannot say asavir the hagisa mavatale, because you only say that where both sides are equal to or larger than the omeid that you're trying to be mevato by saying asavir da hagisa mevatole. And in fact, you have it here because 1.5 is a larger presence of omeid than the 1 amma of paratz. So says the Gemara, now it's not trying to prove a halacha from here, it's just asking, why didn't Rabbi Yehuda say that? So says the Gemara, Einachinami, he could have done that. That would be a valid way to block off the extra 5 amos, but v'kuli hailo atrachu rabbanan. The Rabbanan didn't want to make people make 2 different stands, so they said, you could do whichever one you want. You could do what Rabbi Yehuda initially suggested, which is leave 2 amos of space and then 3 amos of standing, or you could do space of an amma, 1.5 of standing, space of an amma, 1.5 of standing. And if you think about it, in both those cases, the main thing that we were trying to address was that we do not have a scenario where both sides of the most center beam are equal or larger than the beam itself, in which case it will be mevatel. In this scenario, Rabbi Yehuda's initial scenario, the larger, the thing closest to the 10 amos is 3 amos versus the other side is 2 amos that's of space, so it's obviously more. And even in the alternative scenario where we suggested, the 1.5 of omeid is more than the 1 of paratz, and therefore you can do it. Okay, says the Gemara. So fine. We've established Rabbi Yehuda's case that you could have space of 2 and then 3, or this other case. So ask the Gemara, wait a second. If you're allowing, so if you think about this mavoi that let's say was 15 amos, you have 10 amos of space, then you have 3 amos of board, and then you have 2 amos of opening. Why aren't we worried that people are going to start to go through the 2 amma opening, and then that's going to detract from the status of the 10 amos as being the entrance? If the 10 amos is not considered the entrance, then the kora or lechi that's there doesn't fix the mavoi, you can't carry it. So says the Gemara, Amar Ravad bar Masno, Chazaka ina do meinech pesach gadol v'nechnes pesach katan. Says the Gemara, because the 2 amma opening is 2 ammas, the other is 10. People are claustrophobic. They don't like walking through small openings if they have a big opening, so they're going to go through the 10 amma opening. So says the Gemara, wait a second. So ask the Gemara, why is this any different than Rabami and Rabasi? If you remember, Rabami and Rabasi said the halacha that if you have, as long as you have the side is at least 4 tfachim long, so then you can have a Pesach open. But if it would be within the first 4 tfachim, it would detract, because basically it would create a door from the side, and it would detract from the front door, and the front door would no longer be matir the mavoi, because the lechi or koro would be invalid. So why in Rabami and Rabasi's case, where we had a door of even 3 tfachim, we said would destroy the mavoi because it takes traffic away from the main gate? So why are we saying now 2 amos is okay and a chazaka people don't go through it? So the Gemara says, Hasam kamamayit behilucha, hacha lo kamamayit behilucha. The case of Rabami and Rabasi, if you remember, was basically where there was an opening on the side. So if you're coming from the side, that's a shortcut. People are going to go in it. But the scenario we're describing here is you have a 15 amma opening, it's 10 ammas, 3 of standing and 2, that it's not really, it doesn't save you any time to walk through the 2, so people will go through the 10. Says the Gemara, Tanan Hasam, we learned there. Okay, I think maybe I'll record and send out just the end, because this starts a little bit of something I'm not going to be able to finish by Shachris. I apologize for not getting all the way through, but I'll put out a recording.